What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Fantasy Files podcast, where we talk about our favorite fantasy series and topics. I'm your host today, Spencer, and today we have Holly Tinsley and a few of her friends on the show to talk about their Kickstarter for their new horror anthology, The Anatomy of Fear, including a live recording from one of the authors, and then we'll go into a discussion about kind of writing horror in general for the last half of the episode. Now, we promised you shorter intros in this new phase of the podcast, and I am nothing if not a man of the people. So we're going to hand it over to the authors joining us today to talk about what this Kickstarter and anthologies are. But first, remember to subscribe here on YouTube. And if you'd like to connect with us, our Twitter and Discord are linked below in the description. With that out of the way, let's introduce our guests. So who are you guys?
I'm Holly Tinsley. I am back because these guys can't get rid of me, no matter how hard they try. I keep on coming back. I am the author of the Vanguard Chronicles. Book 1, We Men of Ash and Shadow, was an SBFBO 7 finalist last year. The sequel, The Hand That Cast the Bone, came out in April of last year. And I am, for some reason, the captain of this crazy project. So, yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Jacob?
I am Jacob Sannox. I am the author of The Return of King Arthur, which is soon to be a trilogy, The Raven Master's Revenge, which was an SPFBO semi-finalist in 2019, and Agravain's Escape 2, and The Dark Oak Chronicles. Dark Oak was an SPFBO semi-finalist in 2018, I believe. And you can find me on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and my website's jacobsannox.com.
Cool. Tim?
Hi, I'm Tim Hardie. So I was I am the author still, not just of Hall of Bones. That's the SPF 07 finalist, same year as Holly, basically. So that's basically a dark fantasy meets Vikings and Game of Thrones type series, and the other two books in that particular series are also out as well. So that's me.
Very cool.
Sean Crow here, author of the Godless Lands series and my Valhalla Steel series. So I go low fantasy with Godless Lands and science fiction fantasy with Valhalla Steel. I've been in the I haven't made it super far in the SPFBO, but there's always next year.
So you mentioned Valhalla Steel is sci fantasy. Can you tell me, I'm just personally curious, can you tell me a little bit more about that? Is it like a Star Wars kind of situation where there's magic and space travel?
No, there's no space travel in that one. It is more of a cyberpunk future.
Okay.
And with mythology. So it follows a band of gun running Vikings who basically got pushed out of Norway when they went toe to toe with the Fae. Europe is run by the Fae for the most part. They get sent to the United States and they're rebuilding their empire there. So I really like fantasy, and I like something a little futuristic thrown in. So it's definitely a far cry from my Godless Lands, but cool. I like around to different ideas.
Yeah, that sounds super interesting. I actually just bought Godless Lands the other week, so I'll have to check out Valhalla Steel.
Awesome.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I'm super happy to be a part of this, especially, with a Kickstarter and getting to promote that and get some more eyes on it. Would you guys like to tell me a little bit about, first of all, what the Anatomy of Fear is, but also a little bit about the Kickstarter and kind of how it operates and all that? Whoever is the spokesperson.
I feel like this is going to be me, isn't it?
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, so the elevator pitch for the Anatomy of Fear is, what we've done is we've brought together 12 authors some of whom write horror quite regularly, some who write fantasy, some who write grimdark, and we've created a collection of 12 stories, with each author picking a certain part of the body, hence the name The Anatomy of Fear. So I picked neck, for example, and what we did is we used our stories to really try and explore the theory of what fear is, not just in the sense of wanting to make the readers scared, but also looking at how fear affects us, how it can be used as a tool, what the emotions and the drives behind it are. So what we've ended up with is 12 really different voices, all talking about maybe personal fears or fears that they wanted to explore a little bit more. All the stories are amazing. I've read them all, so I'm really excited to bring them out. And the Kickstarter is obviously running from, it's live now until February the 21st. So we've got lots of cool reward tiers. We've got lots of like digital bonuses, so like videos, behind the scenes, sneak peeks, things like that. And I'll see if anyone else wants to talk now, otherwise I'll just ramble.
Yeah, I think it's just really that Kickstarter, I suppose, that the target and where we're getting to on that. I think we're closing in, aren't we, on our sort of initial goal, which is quite exciting. I must admit, this is my first ever Kickstarter, so I've never done anything like this before. I don't know if anybody else has, actually, whether this is all new for all of us. But I must admit, there was that terrifying moment of going live and thinking, will no one contribute to this thing? And it's done brilliant. It's taken off, and really strong first day. But it would just be great now just to get over the line with that first target.
Yeah, it's incredible. I was kind of looking at it last night, and I'm like, oh wow, they've made significant progress on their Kickstarter.
I think I just want to say as well, because we've had confusion with some of the videos we've done recently, because we're promoting something that's live now. So by the time this goes out, we might actually have hit target, in which case we need to be talking about stretch goals.
Yes, go for it.
So yeah, if we have got to the point where this has come out and we have met target, we do have some stretch goals as well that we're going to be adding. We are hoping to try and get to the point where we can add audio in as an option as well, and we're currently looking at adding some really cool things, like some more digital rewards, some more art and illustration rewards. So yeah, just if you haven't heard already, by the time you see this video, bear with us, because all this stuff is hopefully coming.
Nice. Yeah, I'm gonna rush this out, so it should go out on Monday.
Cool. We'll have hit it by then, definitely, no problem.
Yeah, for sure. 24 hours. Let's go.
If we haven't hit it, split your money, please. So both objectives are absolutely fine, whichever you want to support.
So who are some of the other authors on this Anatomy of Fear project? There's 12 total, right?
Yeah. Okay, so I keep getting asked this, and every time someone asks me, my mind goes blank. I've been looking at these names every day for the past 6 months. So we've got obviously the four of us, and we also have Bjorn Larson, we have L.L. McRae, we have Crystal Matar, we have Ryan Howes, we have Zamir Akhtar, we have, this is the point where I forget who I've mentioned.
Ryan.
Yeah, we have Brian Bellick, we have Trudy Skies as well. And how many is that now? I need to start bringing a list.
Yeah, that's 7. So there is somebody out there. Who is it?
I can't remember who I've already said. This is the problem. I forget which names I've said after about 3.
Crystal Matar, Lacey Connolly, L.L.
Lee
Lee, of course. Yeah.
How can we forget Lee?
Sorry, Lee.
Please forgive us. We're just amateurs at this. This is why we run a Kickstarter. Why?
So everybody's picking this different body part that they kind of talk about. So it's not fear of this specific body part, but it's something involving that. Is it like body horror? Is a lot of it body horror?
I don't think there's an awful, I mean, I think there is a lot of horror like around the body. I mean, it's going to be gore and blood and stuff like that. But when I gave all of the authors the brief, I was kind of very clear that this was really open for interpretation. So some people have taken it very literally. So like, an arm is literally an arm, but then some people might take, for example, eye and do something about jealousy and like green eye. So all the horror elements are very different. So I mean, mine is more kind of psychological. I think Sean's is quite psychological as well, whereas you got Lee and Zamil, which are just outright gore-filled horror fests.
Oh my gosh. Jeez, okay, that's cool. Did you guys find it difficult or easy to kind of take whatever body part you had gotten and create a story out of that? Was that a kind of a new exercise?
I love prompts personally. Like short stories are a thing. I hammer out short stories left and right for entertainment. Um, but I had a little bit of a harder time with this one, not so much because of the prompt, but because horror is not a genre I have written in. And though I've written about some horrible things, like the actual horror aspect of it was difficult for me. Like I was like, okay, I'm more of a heroic kind of sci-fi heroic fantasy guy. So capturing those emotions was, I mean, it was entertaining. I really liked the test.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was definitely difficult because it's not my wheelhouse. So
Right. Okay.
And yet Sean's book scared the hell out of me. So
So what made you guys, speaking of that, what made you guys want to do an anthology of stories that's kind of outside the norm? Like you guys all write like science fiction, fantasy, that kind of stuff. What made you guys decide horror? Was it just to try something new?
And I think it's mostly because I told them to.
Oh, okay.
We're just all too polite to say Holly made us do this anthology. We can't escape.
if it's flop, Holly made us do it. If it turns out really great, well, I have an answer for that.
Right.
Oh, what is that? Yeah.
Sure.
I think it's just another tool to use, I was excited about it because I was like, okay, I've not really done this. This is something else I could add into my wheelhouse, How many feathers in your cap can you get, Make people feel fear, make them feel pride, joy, sadness. I mean, I feel like the mark of an author is to make people feel stuff when you read their content. So horror is just another aspect.
Right. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, I think when I initially approached some of the authors that were in it, there were a few people who were quite, tentative about getting involved. So when I spoke to, Trudy and LL McRae, they both kind of weren't 100% sure whether they would be able to deliver something in the horror genre because it's so far removed from what they would usually write. But we kind of talked between us about what we really wanted to achieve with the book. And what we wanted to achieve was to scare people as kind of almost a secondary objective, but as a first objective to really see how we could blend fantasy and horror and grimdark and gaslamp and all these different genres that people would usually write in to create something that, crossed over a little bit. So I think once people started writing, I think they were surprised just how good the stories they were coming up with were.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. That's got to be interesting to dive into a new genre and be like, oh, I kind of like this. This is working out. But yes, so speaking of kind of getting everybody together, what was it like kind of assembling this Suicide Squad?
I mean, I feel like it's going to be me again. I feel like I'm going to be taking up all the talking here, but I mean, initially it was myself and PL Stewart, who is another fantastic author and who's doing the foreword for us. We kind of started talking about doing a group project together, and initially he was heading up the project and I was really acting as a sort of PA. And then for various reasons, he needed to step back from the project, and I sort of accidentally ended up in the role that I have, so for better or worse. So I had a list of about 20 authors that I reached out to. I mean, all of the authors that are on this podcast now I know really well anyway. We've all known each other for years, and we pay to read for each other, help each other out on projects and things. So I already knew these guys were up to the task. And then it was a case of I just messaged the authors that we wanted to get involved and just said, this is the project. I think I sent everyone like a really overly complicated brief with like images and like graphs and things like that. And yeah, the first 12 people I approached all said yes immediately, which really took me by surprise. I thought I was gonna have to wade through the whole list. So I mean, there was all I didn't even get to. So that's the second book right there.
Okay. So Jacob and Tim, when she first reached out to you, your initial reaction was like, oh yeah, I definitely want to be on board with this. It was a quick yes.
yeah, for sure. And I knew what sort of team that Holly was putting together as well. So I was a little bit starstruck and I was like, I'm going to be on that team.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like a no-brainer, if I'm perfectly honest. I always like to try new stuff. I think this is, I suppose my writing career in a way is me trying something new and different that I haven't done before, actually. So it didn't feel for me like dark fantasy was a massive leap, which is what I write, getting into horror and just trying something a bit different. So Yeah, it's very nice to be asked, and I think you've got to take your opportunities when they come up. So like Jacob said, this is a strong book, in terms of the contributors. They're all quality indie writers, every single one of them, and to sort of like be in that assembly, it is quite nice, because it gives you a bit of confidence. Actually, you can do this sort of stuff if you push the envelope and try something new. So yeah, I was delighted to be involved.
Very cool. Very cool. Same for you, Sean. Your initial reaction when she reached out?
Oh yeah, I mean, these three and then a couple others were part of the Marmite little group. It's a little collection of authors that, I mean, we bounce off so much stuff, and as soon as Holly said, "Hey, this is a project," I was like, "Well, of course, you guys are kind of like my group of people when it comes to authors. We share a lot and help each other out." So I was happy to join.
Okay, cool. So my next question here is, who has the scariest story?
Oh, I'm so interested to hear what people think now.
Well, I haven't read either of your guys's. I have read Jacob's, and I really enjoyed his. It was like really in-depth Twilight Zone for me. I got a kick out of it.
Okay, cool.
But I haven't read everybody yet, so I'm still making my way through. Life's been a little busy lately.
Nice.
Zamil's kept me up at night.
Really?
Yours is horrific.
Oh, I can't wait.
It's good, but it's so scary.
I kind of went a bit Twilight Zone with mine. It's like a bit more suspenseful, and I was like, "Oh, this is what everyone else is doing." Okay, I'm not sleeping.
Nice.
I suppose the process we went through, because we're still relatively early in the sort of development of the project, is it's actually quite hard to sort of beta read 11 other stories and write your own as well. So actually what we did early doors was we actually subdivided the group. I think there were 3 different beta reading groups, if I remember rightly. So we each basically worked in like a group of 4, just to sort of do a proper edit and a proper bit of feedback on people's writing. So I was I'm trying to think who I was with you, wasn't I, Holly? I think you were in my group. Yours is very good, right? So just to tick that one off. But no, it's really sort of imaginative, really visual, and very much that kind of gas lamp sort of vibe to it. It's sort of that kind of it's a really memorable story actually. But and then Bjorn Larson was in my group as well, who's kind of like took me down the most random drug trip fueled experience I think I've ever been on. That was just crazy. I'm trying to think who else was it. And Brian was also in my group as well, so he did something that made me look at toes in a totally different way. Yeah, so it depends what you like. Some of it's very psychological, some of it's quite, I think, more fantasy led, and other bits it's just right straight into that sort of body horror. I think that's the thing. This sort of anthology is going to have something for everybody, because there's all sorts of different ways people have taken that broad brief, and they've gone with their particular vision of it, really. So I do want to read them all, and we're going to get that kind of the next phase we're in now. We're in sort of final versions pre-editing, so they're kind of fairly final stories now. So we're getting into the chance to read it more for pleasure, I guess, rather than just for that work element of honing the story.
Yeah, I feel like, everybody, you kind of touched on it there, that everybody has a kind of a different, I guess, view or take on like what makes them scared. And so a horror anthology is actually really cool, because then you get a good mix in there, and you're sure to, impact somebody with 1 or 2 or 3 of the stories, or because I feel like I've read a lot of horror that other people found really scary and it didn't scare me, but then there's that like occasional book that really gets you. There's this book called Bone White that I read a couple months back that just scared the shit out of me. So can you guys talk about, without spoiling your story, can you guys kind of talk about like what fear means to you in the context of your writing? Like, is it like, do you tackle the concept of fear in a non-scary way for any of your stories, or is it all like meant to be terrifying, if that makes sense?
Should we just all go round and just do a little brief?
Sure. Yeah.
Whatever. So for mine, I kind of overcomplicated it for myself because my story, I wanted to take the element of fear from somebody who had had a near-death experience, and I kind of wanted to flip it so that the character I've written about has, sorry, I'm getting loads of feedback off my microphone, it's put me off. So the character I've written about has had this experience and is now unafraid of death and almost sees death as like a game to play and to be won, because they don't think about anything else. And the shift, the kind of the shift in attitude means that they're now afraid to live. So really the fear in my story comes from being afraid to move past this experience, to actually live a life. You know, their whole existence is just about, you know, beating death and beating this experience. So it was fun for me to kind of look at it from that angle, where we would almost see something that was positive turning into a fear for somebody. So that's how I approached it.
Okay, very cool.
I kind of went down the metaphorical route with mine. I wrote about the liver, and I just had a little bit of a think about exactly what it does and what it symbolizes, that sort of thing. And I'm, as I say, mine is less gory, and I was aiming more for just a slow creeping sense of discomfort, trying to get the old reptilian brain ticking away there.
Yeah,
was the plan. Societal horror, that kind of thing.
okay, very cool. Tim?
Yeah, so my part was the ears is what I got, and which was actually a body part I really struggled with, actually, in terms of trying to come up with something, until I flipped it around and realised I could use sound, and that's kind of what my story is basically all about, is the effect sound has and the fear of sound, but also in this particular fantasy world I created for this collection, it's sound has become weaponized, and so how does society then deal with sound when it's used in a way that you know, people and humans aren't used to dealing with? So so I don't know whether it's it sort of starts out as sort of psychological horror and then just goes crazy basically from about the midpoint in. So it kind of runs the gamut a bit of that, I suppose, horror build up in terms of what is this about, and then it kind of gets a little bit more I suppose horror movie-esque, I guess, towards the end. But for me, that psychological element was something I was trying to bring out in my story all the time, sort of being fearful of something that's not normally something you'd be afraid of.
Okay, very cool. I like that. Sean?
So I had Mind, and it was fun because I for me, it's like when you see these horror movies and you see, you know, like Freddy or Jason, the walking guy, I've always been like, why don't you just plug him? Like, okay, bam, 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 put him, break his leg. Like, come on, people, let's work through this. So like, for me, horrible would be if it's something you can't fight, something you can't oppose, something that's attacking your mind, you know, and like, you could be the biggest, baddest, meanest SOB out there, but if something's literally devouring your mind as you're just sitting there and you can't do anything about it, you can't oppose it, then that would just be like, that whole concept just, ooh, like, I really followed up with that and had something like, okay, these guys are sent out there. I really love this world. I'm actually probably going to write a book or two in this world after I did this.
Oh, cool.
I just love that whole concept of developing. So I was like, okay, they're hunting something supernatural, but then of course the hunters quickly become hunters. It's a kick. So
nice. Okay, so I have before we go into the reading here, I have a Kickstarter question. With you guys kind of running this Kickstarter over the how long has it been live at the time of this recording, the Kickstarter?
We went live on the 22nd of January, I believe. So it's a 30-day run. So it's 22nd of January and it finishes midnight on the 21st of February.
Okay. So any advice so far for somebody who wants to start a Kickstarter, for anybody out there thinking about doing it for their book?
I mean, we're still really early doors in this, so I think for me to sit and give anybody advice would probably be quite dangerous. But I mean, in terms of this being a learning curve and the things that we've picked up, I think just the sheer volume of people in the community, in the writing community, that are there to help and who are willing to support you, especially, you know, throughout the booktube and the podcast and the review kind of community. So I think if you have a network, if you have people to reach out to, then, you know, definitely let them know what you've got planned, let them know what your ideas are. People will bounce back different thoughts to you, opinions, give you feedback, and then, you know, support you when you go out there. We've had so much support off people, you know, throughout TBRCon and from various podcasts and like yourselves, which, you know, we wouldn't have done even half as well had we not had that kind of community network around us. So yeah, that is the biggest piece of advice I can give at this point.
Cool. Did we mention when this is coming out? It's coming out in October, right? If it's funded. So
the timeline that we're working with at the moment is Sarah Chorn is going to be our editor. So she's going to be taking the completed short stories probably like within the next month to start working on them for us, because she's amazing. And then we're hoping to start formatting kind of early summer with a view to getting some arcs and review copies out at the kind of tail end of September, beginning of October. And then we're hoping to do a full release end of October, beginning of November, around the kind of Halloween time, because, you know, Halloween
for sure.
But obviously, just we do want to state as well that this is a to be confirmed timeline. We are going to make sure we're doing absolutely everything we can to get it out for that point, but it does depend on obviously how the Kickstarter is going, and also all the other things that we've got to consider as well. But we will absolutely try and work to those dates.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Well, we have a live reading of an excerpt from Jacob Sannox for his short story. What's the name of your short story, Jacob?
Well, it's based on the liver, and I had a working title of The Great and the Good.
Okay, no worries. So yeah, we're gonna give him the floor now after I change some settings here. All right. So yeah, whenever you're ready, Jacob, feel free to read your excerpt.
Good stuff. Isn't it funny how quickly we can adapt to new situations, good and bad? A few weeks in Ashwellan and splendour, privilege and abundance became normality, off duty at any rate. Anything I wanted or needed was provided for me. My work was unpleasant, but I adapted to that too, and began to find it grimly fascinating. My role was varied. Sometimes I assisted in autopsies, receiving bagged and labelled organs, while trying to hold down my breakfast, while the physicians and the coroner attempted to establish the cause of death. In cases where the mystery illness was suspected, which amounted to a large proportion of the deaths, these bodies went straight back to the university for a more detailed examination. On occasion, false positives were returned to us, ripped open, skinned, and sewn back up for passing on to the funeral homes. More often, I went out on a dedicated carriage to examine the scenes of death, or just to bring the bodies in when the corpse haulers were busy elsewhere. Staff were thin on the ground, but bodies were never in short supply. The coroner hadn't been joking about the amount of accidental deaths. I retrieved fly-ridden soups that had once been people from carpets, hardwood floors, and sometimes the rooms below. We cut people down, we scraped them from the cobbles far below broken windows, and extricated them from undercarriages. How could so many people be so unlucky? Corpses are unpleasant. Their stink clings to you all day, even with masks, gloves, and aprons, even if you just enter the room with them. They belch, they let out clouds of noxious gases, and sometimes they groan. Terribly unpleasant, but for some reason, and the coroner confirmed it was a common reaction, being around the dead made me ravenous. I ate well after each encounter, despite the gruesome flashbacks. Each and every one of them stayed with me, and I saw them when I walked in the dark or when I closed my eyes in bed. Mr. Seam and I ate at the perpetual party on the 78th floor after work, but afterwards I took to heading off to explore the leisure districts, clad in the clothing and jewellery my room provided, drinking and fucking into the early hours while he stayed home. Mr. Seam, hulking fellow that he was, just couldn't keep up on the one occasion I took him with me, and he left before midnight. I would wake after only a few hours sleep, as fresh as a daisy, and knock for Mr. Seam, but he got progressively harder to wake as time went on. Eventually I stopped knocking for him, and in truth, I felt I'd left him behind somewhat. I've made new friends, built new connections, and was attacking my new life with alacrity, while Mr. Seam was beginning to look worn down on the rare occasions our paths crossed, his skin yellow and his hands shaking. I began to suspect that he was falling foul of the mystery illness himself. His skin had turned jaundiced and papery. His eyes were bloodshot and yellow. He seemed disorientated and slow, and I swear the man had started drinking alone. I heard him retching through the walls of our apartment while I whistled in the rain closet. I didn't see him for a few weeks. One night, after hearing that my application for an office job, supported by one of my new friends, had been successful, I partied hard in celebration and returned home in a drunken haze. I tripped as I approached my apartment. I stumbled, staggered forward, and smashed my forehead into the doorframe. And I assume I knocked myself out as I woke up in the corridor next morning. Feeling no pain, I laughed, sat up, still dreading my hangover, but I was healthy and clear-headed. The door to the next apartment opened, and Average Seam stepped into the corridor, dressed for work in his black tunic with the silver buttons, coughing away to himself. He looked so different, his skin yellow, his hair lank and thinning, his back bent double, and he was clutching his gut with one hand. Ash Dwellin most definitely did not sit well with my friend. I clambered to my feet. Mr. Seam, it's been too long. What did you do to your face? I asked, seeing a massive bruise had appeared on his forehead. And that's it.
That's awesome.
That was great. I love that.
You have a good voice for that story as well.
Yeah, you do,
your
for
accent.
sure. Yeah.
I was going to go with Scottish.
So yeah, let's we've kind of gone through the Kickstarter talk. We've talked about what people can expect from it and what it's been like for you guys kind of being involved in it. Do we want to talk a little bit just about general writing and kind of moving from fantasy to horror? Like what was that like for you having, and we talked about this a little bit, but what was that like for you having done a lot of fantasy, moving over to horror? And is there anything that you think you'll carry over from this experience writing horror into your fantasy writings?
So I've had this world kind of on a back burner because that's just how I work. I can't stick in a single world. Like I like the idea of writing a few in one world, leaving it, closing it, jump to another one. So yeah, I mean, honestly, I want to take this and run with it. Like after I wrote this short story, I was like, man, I almost stopped my third and last book of my Godless Land series. I was like, man, I really want to write this other one. Like I'm set to go. I really want to carry this on. Yeah. Even if standalone, I like how it all came together. When I finished the short story, I was like, okay, I know it needs some touch-ups, but yeah, I just really want to pursue it. I want to dive into that horror aspect even more. Like I write about some dark subject matter, but I would really like to express the true horrors of that world and what it would be like. So it got me all fired up to actually settle down and focus on my last book for my Godless Lands. So
nice.
Where I can dive in.
What about you, Jacob? Are you going to carry any of that stuff, anything you wrote from your short story into your fantasy books or other, not necessarily like plot and that world, but just like elements of horror? Are you going to include that in future stories?
I think I've always accidentally written horrific things into stories that I thought were quite pleasant. Like my epic fantasy tale turned out to be something that people were like, maybe that could do the trigger warning here or there and that sort of thing. I'm actually probably going to move into slightly more positive territory with future projects.
Okay.
I wouldn't mind actually just giving straight horror a go because I'm a massive fan of Stephen King.
Okay.
I like that character-based horror.
Very cool. What about you, Tim? Any elements of horror that you'd like to move over to your fantasy series?
Yeah, like I think I said before, that it didn't feel like a massive leap going from dark fantasy into horror. So I probably, I don't know, if my book isn't quite on the scale of, say, Zamil's we mentioned earlier on, for example. Right. But in many ways, a bit similar to Sean. I think I don't know whether I want to write what I would call a horror book. I prefer it, because I think with the short that worked quite well, because with horror, it's all about it's all about the thing you fear. That is the center of the story. And I think for a short story that felt quite natural. I don't know whether I'd want to be writing horror for like a novel length type composition. I think I'm more comfortable in that sort of fantasy, dark fantasy kind of setting. But a bit like Sean, I got so into that short story, I needed a new world for it, because my current sort of creation wouldn't sort of give me what I needed for this particular story. And at the end, I thought, really want to like develop that idea now, turn it into a novel. And so I've kind of left a little bit of a trail of breadcrumbs to what could be a future sort of full-length story. And I said, no, you're going to finish the story series that you have started writing. You will not get distracted. But I'm definitely going to go back to it, so I can sort of see maybe in a year or two's time. That's going to be a project. So maybe not the horror element so much, but I think the setting, the characters, the scenario they're in, for me, it just feels like there's sort of unplumbed potential there, and I need to mine that a bit further, basically. So yeah, that's probably what will carry into my writing, I should think.
Okay. Holly, most of your stuff is pretty dark, so
Yeah.
I don't like how much of this will carry over. In one of your last short stories, you had someone dying like an accordion, and that terrified me. So I don't know.
One of my more friendly stories. Yeah, I mean, let's be honest, I don't really have far to carry over from where I already write into horror. And I think, to be honest, a lot of that stems from the fact that I already wrote horror anyway. So the novels that I have out are all kind of grim, dark, low fantasy. But in terms of the short stories I've written and some of the other stuff I've had published in like magazines, websites, that tends to be horror. And I tend to work more in the kind of gothic horror realm. So for me, like horror is the classic horrors, so Dracula's, and I mean, my all-time favorite is the Dorian Gray story. And also I like Jekyll and Hyde as well. That's another one of my favorites. So I like the really old school stuff.
Okay, nice. Well, kind of speaking of that, did you guys read any horror to prepare for this? Any other like horror short stories, or do you guys typically read a lot of horror?
I was on a Lovecraft kick like 6 years back, just devouring Lovecraft I could, Pet Cemetery, some Kuntz books. You know, I struggle just to read anymore. I feel like life gets a hold, you know, kind of goes to the side. But I think I tied into that. I like that eldritch horror mentality. I like that. The beyond the basic that you see, there's something even more terrifying out there in the stars. I like that concept. So yeah, that probably has a little bit of a influence in what I've written.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just started reading H.P. Lovecraft for the first time a couple months ago. There's a new like subscription service for audiobooks and ebooks called Scribd. And I had never really wanted to spend a credit on H.P. Lovecraft before, like on Audible or something, because I was like, it's going to be kind of a toss up on if I like it or not. But they had a bunch of his books on there. I started reading those, and I'm like, man, I think I'm going to be a big, Lovecraftian fan, because this stuff is pretty cool. I like it a lot.
He was way ahead of his time, wasn't he?
Yeah.
I mean,
I was thinking that it was all going to be kind of old sounding, because I've read like Haunting of Hill House and even something like Salem's Lot I read, and I'm like, I feel like this is just like not modern enough for me. And so that was kind of the fear that I had with Lovecraft. But everything I've read by him, I'm like, oh yeah, like obviously it doesn't sound like something that would be written today, but it's engaging and fun, and always has like a really fun twist. And so yeah, he's cool. What about Tim? Any horror that you've read either to prepare for this or just in general?
Well, funny, I just listened to that H.P. Lovecraft discussion, because that was exactly me. Didn't read an awful lot of horror. Probably I think I probably more consumed it through things like the movies. So your Stephen King remakes and those sort of 80s horror, I guess, was kind of my era basically. But yeah, H.P. Lovecraft as a reading was a really important influence when I was sort of in my sort of early to to sort of through to late teens. Read an awful lot of his stuff, and you're dead right, Sean. He's absolutely way ahead of his time, and in many ways one of those sort of, I think, actually one of the building blocks of sort of how modern fantasy and horror is kind of written now, really. So well worth reading. I didn't feel like I needed to prepare as such for this, because I felt like I was in my comfort zone. I just needed to push it a bit. But also, I don't like, if I've got an idea, I don't like to sort of try and read around to give me inspiration, because what I tend to find happens then is you end up actually recreating what you're reading. So for me, I have more of a tendency to retreat, actually. So for example, when I was doing the beta reading with everybody in the group, I was going to determine to write my stuff before I looked at anybody's, even though like Holly was finished ridiculously early and was like, I'm finished. And everyone else was like, oh my God, we need to start. So it was quite tempting to sort of pick her story up and read it, but I deliberately didn't want to do that, because I thought that might influence what I was trying to put down on the page. So for me, it's actually more a case of a treat, stay true to that idea, and then sort of like, look at stuff later on. So yeah, probably not a big horror reader now, but more, I guess I get those kind of kicks more from that sort of dark fantasy, gothic fantasy kind of setup, really.
Okay. Is that kind of a common a thing with writer when you're preparing to sit down to write something new or the next installment in a series or something? Do you kind of take a break from reading so that it doesn't influence, or do you read to prepare? Which one is more your style?
I think it's different depending on different people. We get 4 different answers on this one from people on here. But so I very much believe you need to read to write. But I have had long periods where I've not read for pleasure for quite a considerable period, pre-writing really. But so yeah, I think but definitely if you're in that sort of zone of, I don't know, trying to write a novel, yeah, it obviously eats into your time, and that obviously eats into your leisure time and your ability then to sort of do other things. But I always find if I read a book, I'll learn something from it. And that's what I mean about being careful not to take too much. Like my current read is actually sci-fi right now, and so because I want to be completely removed, because I want to properly switch off. Other times I'm reading people, authors that are writing stuff very close to the kind of stuff that I produce, and then there's much more, I suppose, much more crossover ideas and so on. But yeah, I think it's always interesting seeing how somebody writes, and that's the curse. Once you become a writer, you read in a different way. I don't know if anybody else thinks this, but I find you read in a different way and you become much more critical, and you start to see how they've structured something. So although you're still reading for pleasure, a little bit, look how they've done that, and make a note. And then you just have to be careful to see where the craft is good and how it's sort of developing and what's useful, but don't start to sort of take over somebody's idea and use that to the exclusion of your own, really. So that's kind of how I approach it, doing a bit of both.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. It makes sense that, if you're writing a fantasy book, you would pick up a sci-fi or something to read so that you're enough removed from it. That's a cool idea. Anybody else? I know I kind of jumbled the questions there. I'm curious though, do you guys typically read while you're writing? Anybody else, Holly or Jacob?
I mean, I've kind of mentioned it before a few times when I've done podcasts and things. So I have this concentration issue where I really struggle with fiction and books. So for me, it doesn't matter how great a book is, it could be the most fantastic, but I will struggle to get through it if it's more than about 200 pages long. There's just something in my brain that just does not compute like fiction at that kind of length. So for me, I probably get through about 4 to 5 novels a year. So the looks of horror I get from people when I tell them that I'm an author who reads 4 books a year, it's quite bad. But I actually, when I'm writing, I read things like biographies, historical accounts. I read academic papers. I mean, I have got a whole folder of downloads of research papers and kind of academic studies on different things, and it's so fun to go down that rabbit hole, especially when you're writing about something and you can spend an entire day reading about the history of cottage cheese, for example, and I've literally done that. That's 7 hours of my life I'll never get back. But yeah, I like to read stuff that where I can learn like random facts and things. I love fiction, but I just can't consume it in, big quantities. It's bite-sized quantities for me.
Do audiobooks help at all? Are you an audiobook listener with big fiction?
I do try with audiobooks, and I do tend to have a little bit more success. So audiobooks, my problem is I tend to listen to them at night when I've been working all day, and then I end up falling asleep. So I'll listen to the same chapter like 10 times.
Right.
But I mean, it's really just a case of if I have a book, I have to sit down, and it's a discipline for me. Like I enjoy reading, I love it, but to get started and to be able to do it at any length, I have to do it as a discipline. I got to sit down and really focus. So
yeah,
it's just the way my brain works. So
definitely.
Next time I have a cottage cheese question, I gotta ask Hall.
Oh,
yeah,
for
come to me.
sure, dude. Yeah, definitely. Jacob, do you read while you write?
Yeah, I don't really worry about what I'm reading so much influencing what I'm writing. I tend to draw quite a lot of material from historical stuff that I've read, and also from myths, that kind of thing. I do have to be quite careful, so for instance, I'm listening to all the Jack Reacher novels back to back, which have got nothing to do with what I write, and like all the Sherlock Holmes stories, that sort of thing. What I do find is that I have to be careful what I'm watching, because it tends to put me in the mood for something more historical. Or say if I'm watching, so at the moment I'm writing my Return of King Arthur series. I've just finished that book like last night. So if I was watching Lord of the Rings or reading the Silmarillion or something like that, it would kind of shunt me out of the mode that I needed to be in. So I do have to be quite careful with, the vibes that I'm surrounding myself with. And I try and really stop consuming, when I'm trying to get into something, I stop consuming a lot of media, start trying to put media on that will, music on, that will help generate the vibe that I want, so I don't get distracted, because I'm very impressionable and very Gemini.
All right. Well, I think Holly, you mentioned that a lot of your kind of inspirations were from older horror, right? And is that kind of what you drew for your book, is some of that older horror style?
I mean, I think that's generally what I tend to write if I'm writing horror. I think for this one particularly, I don't know if there was a specific source of inspiration. I know when I set out that I wanted to create something where it wasn't so much like there wasn't so much blood and gore to it. It's much more of the inner thoughts. But I mean, I don't think any of the things that I would normally consume as horror would inspire me to write this story. I don't know. This one came out of left field, really. I mean, initially, I wanted to write something that was very anatomical. So I love, I'm going to say this name so badly now, and I apologize. So Guillermo del Toro, the director, he did Pan's Labyrinth, he did Hellboy. So he does loads of work with like costuming and design and animatronics. He's got a few books out that are all about monster creation and different creatures. So I really wanted to go down that route originally and do something very kind of, bones sticking out the wrong way and like elbows on the kneecaps and all that. But yeah, I sat down to write and something completely different came out.
Nice. Okay. Jacob, did I ask you about your horror influences?
Mostly Stephen King. That's the kind of, I like stuff about generally writers actually, or normal people being put in horrific situations. So like Cujo being trapped in in a car with a rabid dog outside, or Gerald's Game. I don't know if anyone's read that, but just kind of being stuck in a situation and knowing that you've got a long, slow death coming, that kind of thing, and getting inside the character's head. So I'm less about the slash and gore stuff and more about
psychological,
looking around in the head.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just starting to get into Stephen King. I've been a Dean Koontz fan for a long time, but Stephen King I'm just getting into. So Gerald's Game, I'll have to check it out. Okay, so with you guys writing the anthology, how much coordination was there between the 12 of you to keep a common theme? Is there a common theme throughout? Were you able to play off each other's stories or anything like that once you all kind of picked a body part?
I felt like it was pretty independent. I mean, like Tinsley said, we all kind of went our own direction. We had a lot of freedom, which I love. You know, I think if we had tried to coordinate, I've tried to coordinate in the past with other writers. I struggle with it a lot because I'm a control freak. Like I don't like other people telling me what to write or how to write it. And so I think having that freedom and being like, oh, I would have never thought to take that approach, or I never would. I think that's what makes it really cool, is that they're all different. They all have a different voice, different style, different everything. So I think anybody that picks up that book, yeah, you're probably going to find a story that doesn't trip your trigger, but then you're going to find that one. You're like, oh man, I love it. What else do they write? So,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
I think for me it was about having a common thread that we could pull through all the stories, rather than us having like a really rigid kind of set of boundaries. I wanted all the authors to have, like we said, the freedom to interpret it. But I think what was good was the way we broke down the beta reading groups into the smaller groups. That very early on gave everybody like a channel to kind of look at what everyone else was doing, to see what they were doing, and you know, if they could pick up ideas from other people. So, and we've got a group chat as well, so I think we all kind of go on there and talk out different ideas and kind of throw things out to the group and say, hey, you know, what do you think of this? And people are very responsive. So I think there has been a lot of freedom, like Sean says, but I think people have been very responsive to, you know, reacting to each other as well and giving feedback.
Yeah, I think the only bit of organising in terms of story, I mean, obviously there's a lot of organising for running a Kickstarter and, you know, the machinery of putting a book together, but I think for the actual story itself, it was pretty much just the scrap over body parts, wasn't it? Which sounds pretty bad now, put it like that. But, you know, I think there were a few people that were arguing a little bit over whether they got the, you know, blood or teeth or other choice bits. But then, yeah, I think I would have really struggled if you'd said, you know, it needs to have ears and it must have a, you know, a beach ball at the, you know, the waypoint or whatever. I find, you know, some people find prompts really useful. I just find they immediately make me think only of the prompt and nothing else. And I find it really gets in the way of storytelling. So I think, you know, for me, that sort of freedom technique with it, once you'd sort of got that broad thread and theme running through the collection, you know, it was perfect for my writing style, really.
Yeah, again, it's because there's the whole picking a body part. It's quite interesting in the sense of, like, if it was an art class or something and you was to say, I don't know, do me a painting of love, and you might get like impressionist or surrealist or realist or, you know, something along those lines. It's quite an interesting exercise. And so when you say to somebody, okay, pick a body part, write something scary about that, what direction their mind goes, it tells the reader quite a lot about the writer, more than just the story itself.
I'm not sure if we should be worried about that. Go with some of the stories.
We should all be very, very worried, and I'll leave it there.
We're all right. It's our spouses that have to worry.
All right. Well, my next one here is how do you guys approach writing a short story differently than you would a novel? Obviously, one is significantly longer than the other, but is it hard to kind of take that whole, like, you know, however many part structure and kind of push it down into a shorter segment? Is that difficult, or do you enjoy that more, maybe?
See, now I have
It's the first time I've done it.
I was going to say, I have a theory when it comes to writing short stories versus writing novels. Because what happens is, if I sit down to write a short story and I give myself a target of 3,000 words, I'll write 26,000. If I sit down and say I'm going to write a novel and I give myself a target of 100,000 words, I'll write about 33 and then start to run out of steam. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sit down, I'm going to tell myself I'm writing a novel when it's a short story, and tell myself I'm writing a short story when it's a novel, and then I should be able to hit all my word count targets. That's my plan.
Very good.
You should be very worried about all of us, I think.
Yeah.
Listen to that. Yeah, I suppose from a technique point of view, obviously, yeah, you're right. I mean, a novel's intimidating, isn't it? I think I've sort of been doing, I've not been doing short fiction for about 12 months now, playing about with different ways to do that. Before then, I always thought the novel was the thing. And I think it just because it took me forever to get from the start of an idea to the end. So maybe there's the novel format suited it. With a short story, you've got to tell what really matters and you've got to lose everything else. But so yeah, I think they just require a very different mindset, and a reader has different expectations as well. So with a short story, you expect to get the hit in that one read, that you can sit down and read it. With a novel, you're making much more of a commitment with that author, and you've got to love their world, and you've got to, I suppose, reward them for spending all that time in your creation, really, haven't you?
Yeah.
But I think it's knowing what you're trying to say with a short story is the most difficult technique, I think. To sort of like, what's the key theme, keeping those characters to the minimum number you need, and then just making sure that I think it's quite nice just to finish something and it feel done. I mean, novel writing is a bit of a marathon effort for anybody, and there are times where I found actually my productivity, a bit like Holly said, you get 33 words. That's all I can do. But I did find, I think my productivity's gone up since I've been writing short stories the last 12 months, because I can get to a point in the novel and think I've got to a stage and I'm tired, and then I'll write a short story and I find that re-energizes me, because the technique is so different, and you get that satisfaction of completing something, and then you kind of go in feeling, well, I've finished something, now I can go back in and bat on this again for another 30,000 words or whatever it is. So the techniques are definitely really different. I wouldn't say I'm a master at either of them, but I think those are the key differences for me.
Okay, cool.
What Tim was saying about it's nice to to get to the end of something and complete it. I put 2 books out in 2020 and then had a bit of a family near miss in 2021, and I've pretty much been on hiatus right up through into 2022. And it was writing this story that allowed me to put a beginning, a middle, and an end, realize I could still do it, get my speed back up, and now I'm back to where I was in 2020, which is wonderful. And I get very, very disheartened when I'm doing first drafts of long stories, and I end up just chopping it into beginning, middle, end, and I very much use like a 3-act structure. And I did approach the short story the same way, and minimizing side plot, just putting sort of light touches in terms of description, and like iceberg technique, where you're just kind of suggesting there's a massive hunk of ice beneath the surface, that kind of thing. I quite enjoyed doing it, and as I said, it's my first short story really, but I'd quite like to do more.
Nice. Okay. Sean?
The transition from novel to short story wasn't too bad, or short story to novel. I like I said, I write a lot of them. I think that's kind of, that gathered a lot of my readers when I first started publishing. I would just constantly write short stories, post them up on my website for people to read and see if they like it, hear some feedback. So I love short stories, and I feel like that actually carries over into novel writing, because each chapter is essentially a short story. You need to have a point that each chapter has that you're trying to prove. So that's kind of my approach on it, and why I think I like short stories so much, because every chapter tells a little story unto itself, has a point, and it doesn't carry on in a novel, whereas a short story, you resolve it. So there is that difference, but the process is kind of the same.
Okay. Yeah. I'm reading a short story by another author who I had read their big door stopper fantasy book, and it's interesting to see the differences, how kind of concise everything is, and the short stories often feel a lot more I think kind of action packed or fast paced, because you only have that little bit of time to tell this story, and I can only imagine that it's got to be hard for somebody that loves a lot of detail in their world, and as a reader, I like that too, but it's cool to get almost the opposite, where you're just getting a streamlined story from usually one character's point of view, and just kind of a race to the finish line. It's really interesting. All right. Well, as we kind of close out here, I have 2 kind of one kind of fun question, and then one kind of promo question. Have you guys, we talked about reading horror and stuff earlier. Is there anything you've been reading lately that you would like to recommend to the audience here?
Well, I know me and Tim have both read the same book recently, which is not technically out yet. We've both had an art copy, and that's P.L. Stewart's third book in his Drowned Kingdom series, which is Lord and King, which I believe is out early spring, I think. But that is just amazing. I mean, it was my top read. I only read 4 books a year, obviously, but it was, my top read of last year. So when that comes out, everyone needs to just get on that and just buy it straight away. Buy the first 2 now, and then buy the third one when it comes out.
Okay. Yeah, I've come really, really close a couple times to hitting the buy now on Drowned Kingdom. I think that's the first one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've come really close to checking that out. I keep meaning to.
Yeah, well, it's well worth it. I am a bit of a PL Stewart fan as well, so he's getting a bit of love on this call. But it's
Sure.
well, it's well deserved. That third book, I think, for me, you can see the progression of the author and the coming together of a really it's proper epic fantasy and the full on chonk kind of way that a lot of people enjoy. He writes some very good stuff.
Okay, cool. Jacob, been reading anything good lately?
I am trying to start a vendetta between Joe Abercrombie and Tim Hardie, because I've been trying to read The Blade itself since the summer, and then Tim released the last, the third book of Brotherhood of the Eagle.
Yeah.
So I read that. I went back to The Blade itself, and then I read an art copy of his upcoming book, and I don't know if you're announcing that, so I'm not going to say titles. And prior to that, I was binging Sean Crow and the Godless Lands books, which I find really horrific. So I was really surprised that but no, I'm really enjoying Joe Abercrombie, and also Tim's Wolf Throne stories that you get on his mailing list. Yeah. I'm turning into a bit of a fangirl. So Tim needs to kind of...
It's working. It's finally working.
This is why none of us have time to read anything else, because we're all so busy reading each other's stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, like Sean mentioned earlier, we are actually all part of a writing group, so that there obviously is an element of sharing each other's work and so on. So I have read all of these guys, and they all are they're quite good, I'll say that. They all know what they're doing. It's a great fun part of being a writer. Actually, is actually you get to that point where you trust people enough to sort of share your early work, your developing work, your ideas. Right. That I think for anybody that is looking at creative writing of any kind, you do need that kind of support network and group of people who can safely bounce an idea off each other and sort of know you'll get honest feedback. So, but yeah, it also means that it's a great, side benefit is you get to read some great books that often, people don't necessarily know about, which is the fun bit of it. That's
awesome. Yeah, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I could pretty much say the same. I think the reason why I love this group, the Marmite Gang, I've read all their work, and I've read a lot of indie work, and we're all indie authors, but I think we can all say that there are authors out there that give indie writers a bad name because they rush it. But I don't find that to be the case with this group. And I think that's why I'm like, okay, I feel like I'm in a group of peers rather than, you're trudging through the trenches trying to find somebody that's going to stay alive in this business. And these three, all their stuff's great. On a more traditional route would be Anthony Ryan's Covenant of Steel. Has probably been the best series I've read in the last decade. I love where he's at in his work. I would say it's definitely been impactful to read that, and I haven't been reading a whole lot this year, but I'm super stoked for his third book. Same with Evan Winter's, drawing a blank on it, Rage of Dragons, and then he came out with the second book, but his third book's coming out this year, so I'm super stoked for that. So
Covenant of Steel, is that like the Pariah and
yes,
that
the
series?
Harder, and then I think the Traitor is going to be his third. He told me he's going to send me an art copy, so I'm pretty thrilled about that.
Nice. All right.
I'll also just quickly mention I'm reading, just because I'm having a bit of a sort of throwback to history sort of thing. I'm reading Ian M. Banks again at the moment for the first time in long time. So that book actually is, again, that's probably the first book I read. Must have read that about 20 years ago. First book where I saw how structure can be used to tell a story. So it's a site. So if you don't know Ian M. Banks, he's a British, or was a Scottish sci-fi writer. Did some amazing output. It's sort of a lot of his stuff set around a universe called The Culture. Have you heard of that? So well worth checking out. And really, really imaginative writer. Every time he wrote a book, it was always mind blowing. That was the first time I've seen somebody use timeline and different perspectives of characters and sort of like tell a story, use those things to tell a story rather than just being sort of like the backdrop. It's necessary to tell the story in the way that he uses it, and it just really blew my mind. So I'm quite enjoying going back to something I read 20 years ago and saying, yeah, it's still bloody good actually.
Nice.
So yeah, really recommend that one.
Yeah, I really need to do that. There's books that I read like 10 or even 15 years ago that I haven't picked up since, like Jack Finney's From Time to Time. I've really been wanting to go back to that. There's a few others that I haven't picked up in so many years that I'm like, I should go back to this and see if it's as good as I remember. But Jacob, you mentioned the First Law trilogy, and it's blowing my mind right now because I DNF'd The Blade itself 2 times. I made it about 65 to 70% of the way through twice. And it was just one of those things where I was like, I don't know what's wrong with me because I don't like this. Like everybody else likes this and I am just not getting it. And it's, or like one of those times where like you play a video game or something and you're like, why do people like this game? Like it's just not doing it. And then you know, a year later or 2 years later, you try it again and you're like, oh, I get it now. And so I picked up The Blade itself like 3 or 4 days ago, and I just started listening to it because I had nothing else to really read for the podcast or anything. I was like, I'm just going to try it again. I'm just going to keep trying it. And finally it clicked for me. And I was like, oh, like I get why people like this. And it's such a like light bulb moment. I'm like, oh, I feel like I can be part of the fan club now. Oh my God.
It doesn't feel like a very plot heavy first installment. Like I like his voice. I like that there's such a distinct voice for each character.
Yeah.
Each point of view, but it doesn't feel like there's massive things happening throughout that first one. I'm just getting to the end of it at the moment, but I've got the other two for Christmas, so I'm kind of thinking it's going to roll off into big events and whatever, from there. But really enjoying it. But I also really want to see Joe and Tim go head to head
in real life, literally.
Yeah. Maybe on Twitter.
Yeah,
to be safer.
Yeah, there's really not a lot of plot going on in the book, and I think that that's one of the things that made me DNF it those 2 times. And also I hated Glokta. I absolutely hated that character. It was to the point where I wanted to like skip his chapters, and I said as much on Reddit, and I got chased off with torches and pitchforks, and people were like, we love Glokta, get out of here.
I'm completely the opposite. He's what kept me in the book.
Okay, yeah. People are like, he's basically the main character. How can you hate him? And I'm like, I don't know. I like Giselle, but I'm like, I just hate Glokta. And this time around, like, Glokta certainly isn't my favorite character, but I like him. Like, he's fine. And so, yeah, it's just, I'm so over the moon to finally have that book click for me. And like, because people keep telling me, like, if you can just get to the second book, if you can just get like through the rest of the trilogy, you'll love it. And I just couldn't make it through that first book. So I'm so glad now. I'm like, yes, I'm on my way to the finish line.
Abercrombie.
What's that?
I struggle with him. I struggle with Abercrombie.
Yeah.
I love his prose. I love how he writes. He's too much of a downer for me. struggle. I can tell his worldview and my worldview probably would clash in the end.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think he's top-notch writer. I don't know. There's some once you great to talk.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's weird because he's my reread. So for me, I just couldn't put his book down when I started. So completely different to you, Spencer.
Yeah.
I could not put it down. And again, I'm a fairly slow reader. Don't have an awful lot of time, so probably I don't know. I'll be doing well to get through 10 books a year. But Abercrombie is one of the ones that the First Law trilogy. That's the one I have read, and then I have reread several. A few years later.
Okay.
Again, thoroughly enjoyed it. Again, he just for me, he just ticks all my boxes. But that's the whole point, isn't it? It's all subjective, and one person's genius is another person's bit average. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was interesting because I had tried the blade itself, DNF'd it the first time, and then a couple months later I found Holly's We Men of Ash and Shadow, and I was like, oh, this is what I wanted the first law to be. And so that's how I ended up really enjoying We Men of Ash and Shadow. And then I tried it a second time and I was like, this just still isn't really what I want. But I'm glad it's clicking this time. I really am, because I just want to be part of the popular group so bad. Like I just want to be able to talk about the book so badly. I see everybody talking about it. I'm like, I'm the only one who's not talking about it. So yeah,
I've never read them, so I'm in the club with you, not thinking to talk about it. So.
You'd probably like them, honestly. You'd probably like them. But the other one I wanted to recommend, I read The Bone Shard Daughter recently, but that's not the one I want to recommend. That was a really good book. But the one that I think you guys would like is called The Vagrant. Have you guys seen this around?
Seen it pop.
The Vagrant. It's really, really cool. I kind of had it on my wish list for a long, long time, and then I finally picked it up. And it's basically, if you think, like Cormac McCarthy's The Road. It's The Road meets The Mandalorian meets the Fallout universe, like Fallout games. And it's basically this guy, he has no name, he's just called the Vagrant, and you get some flashbacks with him, but even then you don't get his name. He's very mysterious, and it's essentially a story about him, kind of like how The Road is, where he's just walking in a straight line through this apocalyptic wasteland. And where the Mandalorian part of it comes in is he's got this baby that he's keeping like in his jacket that he's trying to protect and get from point A to B. And as he's just going from point A to B, he's got all this stuff. He meets all these characters on the road. Some of them are really good and really interesting characters, and some of them are really bad people like cannibals and other people that want to like steal the baby and sell it. And all these different things happen, all these different towns that he kind of goes through, but he never really sticks around in any of those towns for long. So it's kind of interesting how every time he gets somewhere, that that's not going to be like the focal point of the story, because he's just going to keep going and keep going. And so it was a really, really interesting book, especially because the main character is mute. So instead of having this character who's very charming and has a lot of dialogue, and you can kind of like based on their humor or like their charm or whatever, like you are required to judge him fully based on his actions and nothing else. And a lot of the times those actions won't be explained, so you as the reader have to decide for yourself why he did what he did and kind of make up for yourself like what kind of person he is. And it's really, really interesting. It was probably one of the most like engaging reads that I've ever had, as far as like I said, you as the reader are having to work to kind of figure this out. And so throughout the whole book, I was like, oh, well, maybe he did that because of this thing that happened earlier, or maybe he did it for like this reason, or I wonder if he's this kind of person. And it made me question a lot back and forth. And then finally, by the end, you have a pretty good idea of like what kind of person he is. But he makes a lot of decisions that you won't agree with. He makes some that you will. And it was just really, really interesting. It was really fascinating just from like a storytelling perspective. I had never seen anything else done in that way. And there's some other characters that join him that do talk. He's got this goat that follows him around through the whole wasteland, and the goat is absolutely hilarious because it's just like this stubborn, it's like essentially a pack mule, and he also uses it for like milk for the baby, but it's just like, it's so stubborn and it doesn't want to do anything that he wants it to do, and provides a lot of the comedic relief as well as a couple of the other characters. But it's really fascinating. It's one that I really, really recommend, and the audiobook is quite good as well.
Sorry, who wrote that?
Hang on, wait.
I feel like I should remember who wrote it, because I'm pretty sure that Spencer sent me a message on Twitter at like 1 o'clock in the morning.
I probably did, yes.
Time to say, have you read this book?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did. It's Peter Newman.
It's on the list.
Yeah, so definitely add that one. It was one that I was like, I don't know if it would be like in my top 5 for the year, but it would definitely be up there. It was definitely one of the most fascinating reads that I've read recently. But yeah, so with that out of the way, let's hand it over to you guys. What is next for you? Is there anything that you would like to plug? Anything you have coming up? We'll kind of start with Holly and kind of zigzag around.
So for me, I don't have anything in the near future coming up. I do have, as I said earlier, several novels currently in the works. So I have the 3rd book in the Vanguard series that is being worked on, which I'm hoping to get out early next year. I have another novel I'm working on, which is based off of a character I used in a short story for another anthology I did, which was the Skybreaker anthology. So that's kind of been expanded and explored a little more in a full-length novel. And then at the moment, my focus is 100% on the Anatomy of Fear, getting that ready to go, getting the Kickstarter to where it needs to be. So I'm going to take a final opportunity here to plug the Kickstarter again and just say, if you haven't already, please go and have a look at it. Please back us, support us any way you can. We have got more rewards coming very soon. We've got more cool artwork and some more updates coming. So just keep an eye on my Twitter page, and you can follow all of the news and what's going on there.
Awesome. Real quick, I'm so sorry. Somebody just knocked on my front door. Give me 1 second. I'm sorry.
Ask them if they want to support the Kickstarter.
Yeah. Sales challenge.
It was Jeff Bezos at the door. He was saying that he'd donate $2 million if he could turn it into an Amazon series, a la Wheel of Time or Rings of Power. So,
yeah, I mean, so yes, absolutely. I have the authority to speak on behalf of the whole group and say yes, we will take that deal.
No, wait, on the whole group apart from Sean.
Yeah. Come on, Sean. It's not like that.
I refuse by that. The crime against those poor books.
I know. I could talk for hours about that, so I'm not even going to touch it.
Yeah.
All right. So Jacob, what do you have coming up? Is there anything that you would like to plug?
Yes, very much so. So my trilogy, The Return of King Arthur, is this thing you could only have done in indie, which has dual timelines from the 5th century up through English history, and there's a modern story at the same time. It's a trilogy. I've literally just finished the 4th draft of the last ones, and it's called Tristan's Regret, and that is going to be coming out soon, and that will conclude my Return of King Arthur story. And I've started on the last of my dark epic fantasy trilogy, the Dark Oak Chronicles. So that's what will be coming out. Well, God knows when, but hopefully 2024. I'm actually going to properly outline it. Fingers crossed.
Cool. Can you I just quick tangent, can you give me a quick like elevator pitch on the Dark Oak Chronicles, because Holly has recommended it to me a number of times?
I'll tell you what gave me the idea. Essentially, I'm a massive Tolkien fan, but I didn't want to write something Tolkien derivative at all. I didn't write fantasy for a very long time because of that. It's essentially, if you were to take the good and evil, black and white, light and dark of Lord of the Rings, and then switch it in a moment to shades of grey, Game of Thrones, that kind of thing.
Oh.
And if all the orcs at the end of Return of the King just surrendered, and Aragorn and Gandalf had to work out how to feed them, and sort of the good guys being put in difficult situations, and then it's got quite a lot of an ecological bent to it as well, with lots of thought gone into dryads and naiads and that sort of thing.
Okay, very cool. I've heard the audiobook is really good, so I'll pick up the audio. Tim?
Yeah, so I suppose I'm got a twin track thing going on at the moment. So I'm busy writing the fourth and final book to the Brotherhood of the Eagle series, so Hall of Bones. That was the entry book into that series, and I'm trying to finish that off by finishing the fourth book, which is called Broken Brotherhood. I don't think that'll be ready in 2023. I think it might be written in 23, but I think that'll be my 24 release. I had a bit of a break from that writing that whole series a few years ago, and I'm basically pushing out a tangential standalone book, but just to make my life difficult for myself, I set it on a new continent. So same fantasy world, but a brand new continent with a brand new cast of characters and situations, basically. So that's a book called A Quiet Vengeance, and that should be coming out either end of March or April, all being well. So I'm just sort of working through getting the cover art ready for the book cover and so on, getting all that sorted out. So yeah, Quiet Vengeance is going to be my next sort of release, but trying a standalone format rather than a long epic series this time. So yeah, early reviews have been positive, so which is good, because if they've been really bad, I would have had to have not published that book.
Nice. We lose Jacob.
Looks like it.
That's okay. Well, let's see. I guess he has the Zoom link, so if he wants to come back in, he can. All right, Sean, anything you'd like to plug?
So this year I'll have the last novel in my Godless Land series coming out, tentatively named Blessings of the Devourer. We'll see if that one sticks. I'm terrible with titles, so they change like 20 times before I sit on one. So I'll have that coming out. I have audiobooks for Valhalla Steel and Quenched in Blood. Valhalla Steel essentially completed. There's a couple little tweaks we need to make. And then Quenched in Blood, my narrator's just going to jump straight into that one, so I can hopefully have those released sometime later in the year. I'm hoping for a summer release on that, but we'll see. Blessings of the Devourer, hopefully fall, probably for a release there. And then, there's this other new thing, The Anatomy of Fear. I don't know if you've heard of it. But no, I'm excited to get that out. And then on my website, I was in a Grimdark competition last year. It was a year-long competition, wrote a bunch of short stories. And so I'm taking from what I had in that competition and just slowly posting them up on my website for people to read. So
nice. So Valhalla Steel, that is an audiobook is being made for that right now, or that's coming out?
It's essentially done. My narrator and I talked, and honestly, I've dropped the ball with a couple things going on in life right now, but I'm going to pick that back up. There's just a couple fixes, I think, with the last couple of pages of the book, just a little thing I noticed that we can tweak on, and then that audiobook will be complete. I mean, needs to be rendered, and there's a couple things to edit out, but that one will be done. And then we're going to jump into Quenched in Blood, the novel that comes after that. So hopefully I'll have those to release sometime in summer.
Nice. Is Godless Lands, is that going to be an audiobook?
Yeah, I want to, so Valhalla Steel was a short one. So I was able, it's more of a illustrated novella. It was kind of a proof of concept. So gonna definitely narrate those two. And then, Godless Lands will be there, but I wanted to resolve the trilogy before I jumped into it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. I have an idea of who I want to use for that one. Really great British narrator, but I'll probably open it up again to tryouts next year. So
cool. Nice. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me for this. I wish you all the luck with the rest of the Kickstarter. I'm sure that, I mean, you guys have already crushed it like less than 10 days into the campaign. So you guys are going to absolutely blow out that Kickstarter. And you talked about stretch goal, and just a reminder that that is 5.8K.
I mean, we got really confused earlier, didn't we? Because we were talking about targets and things. So obviously you're seeing it in dollars and I'm seeing it in pounds. But so yeah, our initial target is 3.8K, which is what we need for our basic initial funding, and then we're hoping to hit stretch goals of up to 5.8K, and that would enable us to be able to do an audiobook and also some special editions with some really cool additional artwork in, that hopefully we're going to get some samples of people to see really soon. So yeah, if we could push those stretch goals, that would be amazing.
Sweet. All right. Well, again, guys, thank you so much for doing this. All the luck with the Kickstarter. All right, everyone, that is going to wrap us up there. Thank you so much for hanging out with us, and please go back this Kickstarter. Pledges start at $5, and each tier gets you more and more extras, leading up to a digital library of 14 books from all of the authors involved, and special art pieces like a foil bookmark and art print. There's also a special tier that grants you a bunch of backstage stuff, like access to a special Discord after party and a TBR Con panel video, from what I understand. This is how we support our friends at the Fantasy Files. So we hope that our viewers will back the people that we support, and we hope that we've built up enough goodwill and trust with our audience to be able to ask you all to back these guys, or to at least just go check out the Kickstarter page and give it a repost to whatever social media you use, or send it to your friends. Everything like that helps support this campaign. If you check out our Twitter page, you'll find a post from us with the Kickstarter info that you can retweet or share or whatever, and it will be linked in the description below as well. If you're new here, or maybe have watched us but never subscribed, we hope that today will be the day that we earn your subscription. And we love talking with the other readers in the community, so feel free to hit us up on Twitter at Files Fantasy, or get in touch with us on Discord, which is linked below, or just comment below on the video. You can also find all the authors who appeared in this podcast linked below if you'd like to follow them. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Fantasy Files podcast.
Thanks.
Thanks very much.